Hello and welcome to the Chapter 11 online lecture for COM 4740 Intercultural Communication. A quick reminder that your snapshot papers will be coming due soon, so those should be underway. If you need any help from me or you have questions, please let me know. There are specific written instructions in the handout on e-learning in the snapshot project instructions folder. So make sure you are looking at that carefully and that you are putting your paper together using the process explained on the instructional handout. This chapter is about culture, communication, and conflict. So we're going to be examining different ways we can handle cross-cultural conflict. We can look at conflict in a positive or a negative way. We can see it as an opportunity to strengthen our relationships, or we can see it as something that's just destructive and that we want to avoid. So we're going to start by looking at conflict as opportunity. And what do people who think conflict is an opportunity believe about conflict? And here are some of the things that they believe. See if you agree with these ideas. First, if you see conflict as opportunity, you believe that conflict is a normal and useful process in a relationship. It isn't something to be afraid of. It just happens whenever people try to have a relationship with one another. Because we are different, we're going to bump up against each other sometimes and have disagreements. Although conflict can be difficult, it can also strengthen relationships. So as we work through the process of resolving our conflict, that can make our relationships even stronger. If you see conflict as opportunity, you might believe that confrontation is valuable and relationships without it are suspect. So think about whether you've ever had a friend or family member who says that they and their significant other never fight. We always get along. We never fight. We never disagree. We tend to be suspicious of that. We either think they're not being truthful with us, or that maybe their relationship doesn't exist on a deep enough level for them to have run into disagreements. So we're a bit suspicious or suspect of relationships without conflict. If you see conflict as an opportunity, you believe that things can be changed, right? That issues can be resolved through negotiation, coming up with creative solutions together. So again, it's not something to completely despair over. It's something that can be fixed. You might see conflict as a necessary renegotiation of an implied contract. Now, what does that mean? Well, every relationship has an implied contract, whether it is a friendship or a love relationship or a political relationship. There's an understanding between us about how that relationship is going to work. But over time, and this gets to the next bullet point, relational change, relationships evolve over time. And there may come points where things that used to work for us aren't working anymore, and we need to renegotiate that implied contract between us. So let's say that you and a significant other were casually dating at first, and you agreed that you were going to keep it casual, you were going to see other people, and that kind of thing. But then your relationship gets deeper, you get more serious about one another, and you decide that we're going to be exclusive now. We're going to work hard at developing a monogamous and a unique relationship between us, and we're not going to see other people at all. So you kind of have to renegotiate that contract you had between you to acknowledge that relational change. And that same dynamic can happen between family members, it can happen between people of different cultures, it can happen between different countries even. Over time, relationships change and evolve, so we might need to revisit the rules and the norms that we've been following up to that point. So again, if you view conflict as opportunity, these might be some of the beliefs that you hold. And if you go into the folder on e-learning with the supplemental videos, go all the way to the bottom, you will find a video called Racial Healing and Reconciliation. Now, when I say go all the way to the bottom, when you scroll down on that list of supplemental videos, it's going to run out and you'll see a button that says See More. You're going to have to click on the See More button for it to extend the list of videos, because it's down there pretty deep on the list near the bottom. But this video about racial healing and reconciliation is a really interesting one that I would like you to watch. It's about a group of teens in a community that's having some community health issues and some issues with racism. And these teens are willing to get together and talk about some hard topics and to talk about some difficult prejudices and difficult dynamics in their community in order to try to create some racial healing. So they're looking at things like the social determinants of health. They're looking at how illness strikes those who are impoverished at a greater rate than those who do have means. But they're also looking at how racial difference within their own community might be exacerbating those problems. So it's a really useful look at a group of people who come together because they're thinking of conflict as an opportunity, and they're embracing that opportunity to make positive change in their community. So I do recommend you watch that. Next, we're going to examine the attitude that conflict is destructive, and we're going to focus on France in particular and some of the laws that have been passed by Parliament there to regulate the wearing of religious clothing or jewelry or things like that in society, because of the belief that society should be completely secular, that if you are a French citizen, you are French first, and you shouldn't be demonstrating any other ethnicity or religion or anything that would make you different, that your French identity should be prioritized. And these quotes from the Toronto Globe and Mail kind of illustrate that attitude. The French believe that multiculturalism would only privilege individuals by association with their ethnic, religious, or racial roots. So that's an argument for doing away with multicultural expression so that it makes everybody more equal. And the second quote there, that France tells newcomers that their past belongs in another country. So there's this idea that you should fully assimilate. So as we go through the idea and we examine the attitude of conflict being destructive, we can focus on this particular situation as an example of that. So a person or a culture that views conflict as destructive is going to think that conflict should be suppressed and hidden away and not engaged with. And they would hold views like the ones listed here. The conflict is a destructive disturbance of the peace, that you value pacifism. So you value peace over confrontation, even if the confrontation might lead to a better understanding of each other. You prefer the peace and to be undisturbed. You would believe that the social system should not be adjusted, but rather that members should conform. So we don't change the rules, we demand that people conform to the rules. You would believe that confrontation is destructive and ineffective, so that confrontation is bad. There isn't a positive outcome to confrontation. You want to let everyone save face, so you avoid any embarrassment or ridicule or indignity by avoiding conflict. And you might believe that disputants should be disciplined. So conflict is censured. In other words, if you disagree or you act in a different way, it's punished. You might be fined or arrested or something like that. And as a demonstration of this list of beliefs, I'd like you to watch another video in the supplemental videos folder on e-learning. Again, it's way near the bottom, and you'll probably have to click that show more button to get all the way to the bottom of the list and find this video. But it's a really enlightening look at what's going on inside French society. And in that video, you will hear arguments on both sides of the issue. You'll hear government officials arguing that France is a secular society, and in order to keep it equal for everybody, we have to do this. And then you'll hear Muslim girls and women arguing that we are being pushed out of the public life. We're being banned from going to school and things like that because of our religion. So all this is doing is rejecting and pushing away and isolating and marginalizing a particular segment of society, many of which were born in France and are just as French as anybody else, but because they hold these religious beliefs, they're being pushed aside and segregated from society. So that video does illustrate kind of both viewpoints on that issue, and you'll find it very enlightening on what happens if you see conflict as a bad thing. Throughout the textbook, we've always looked at the social science, interpretive, and critical approaches to the topic. So we'll do the same thing for conflict here and start with a look at the social science approach to conflict. Now remember, the social science approach always tries to be prescriptive. So you'll say, if this, then that, right? If you've got this kind of conflict, then here's how you should manage it. If A, then B. So the social scientist is going to look at elements of the conflict like the ones listed here. How is the conflict being expressed language-wise, in a direct or indirect or pacifistic way? However that's expressed is going to dictate how you handle it. What is the emotional style of the person expressing the conflict? Are they being emotionally expressive or emotionally restrained? According to the social science approach, you're going to handle the conflict differently depending on whether that person is expressive or restrained. Your level of engagement, are you going to be confrontational or accommodating? You're going to base that choice on the demeanor of the person that you're in conflict with. And then, are you using an intermediary or a mediator, or are you trying to work the conflict out just between the two parties involved? The social scientist will say, you look at these things, and those elements will dictate how you should go about managing or resolving the conflict. So again, it seeks to be prescriptive. So if somebody comes to you, for example, and uses a very direct language style, I'm angry with you. They're very expressive. They're yelling. They're very confrontational in their engagement style. There is no intermediary there. It's just the two of you. Well, now you've got this direct, expressive, confrontational person. The social science approach will say there are certain conflict management styles that you should then go to and use because of all that. It's like a recipe. So as always with the social science approach, you're trying to be prescriptive. The interpretive and critical approaches work the same way they have throughout the semester. Remember, the interpretive approach emphasizes the context of the situation. So the interpretive approach says there isn't a one-size-fits-all. You have to look at what's going on. You have to look at the context. So the interpretivist is going to emphasize the cultural context of the conflict. And that dovetails with the critical approach in this case, because the critical scholar is going to believe and to put forth the idea that intercultural conflict arises through perceived unequal or unjust relations between groups, such as international conflicts over border disputes that are rooted in long history between those cultures. So you have to look at the context and examine whether there is an unequal or unjust relationship between them. A good example of this might be the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. If we looked at the cultural context of that conflict, we would say that it goes back to pre-biblical times, and it has lasted through millennia and through many generations, and there has been a lot of back and forth about it over many years. There have been peace treaties signed and broken, and that you have to understand all that context before you would even try to mediate or settle or resolve that conflict. And this is why it's tough for other countries to come in and try to help negotiate there, because those roots go so deep and so far back in history that it's really challenging to understand it all. There's another video I'd like you to watch. If you go into the supplemental videos folder, again, go all the way to the bottom, click on the See More button if you're not seeing it. It's called the Seeds of Peace Camp. And this is a summer camp here in the US where they bring together teens from countries that are in conflict, and they facilitate dialogue between these teenagers. And it's really interesting to see because they engage in normal camp activities during the day, like swimming and boating and playing volleyball and having campfires and things like that. But they also have these discussion sessions that are facilitated to help them understand one another better. And when you think back to the conflict hypothesis, the idea that, can you just throw a bunch of people together who are different and have them work it out? And we said, no, you can't do that. The only way it works is if you have a facilitated dialogue. Well, this is a great example of that. They're actually facilitating discussion among these teenagers. And the idea is that when these teens go back to their home countries, that they will then be seeds of peace in their homelands. They will have had an opportunity to truly interact with kids like themselves who are on the other side of the conflict. So please take a look at that. Before we wrap up here, let's look at the idea of mediation in cultural conflict and the use of an intermediary or a third party to help work out the conflict. We often see mediation used in legal matters. So, for example, having an attorney there to represent the interests of each party and to help work things out in an unemotional way. Someone who doesn't really have a vested interest in the outcome, but they're there to be the voice of reason in the situation. That's usually what an intermediary does. The U.S. has attempted to be an intermediary in intercultural conflicts in other nations. It doesn't always work very well because, again, there's a deep history there that is not always well understood, and this doesn't work in all cultures. The best way for mediation to work is if all parties agree up front to sit down at the table together, to act in good faith, and to cooperate with the outcome that the intermediary recommends. So that third party is going to recommend a solution, and the principle of this is that we're going to agree up front that we're both going to lay our case on the table, and the intermediary is going to advise on the best outcome. So again, that can be very challenging in certain cultures, but it can also be useful to have someone who doesn't have a vested interest in the outcome to help with working things out. That is our chapter 11 on culture, communication, and conflict. As always, please read the chapter carefully, take good notes, ask your instructor if you have any questions, and we will see you next time.